My name is Sharon, and the day my boss fired me, right after I closed a $3.7 million deal, was the day I realized nothing I achieved would ever be enough for him. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, inside a glass-walled conference room that still smelled like the champagne our client brought to celebrate the contract. I had spent 6 months negotiating that deal. 6 months of travel, late nights, strategy calls, and convincing a hesitant European investor to choose us instead of two competing firms. The ink on the contract was barely dry when I walked out of the room, my hands still slightly shaking from relief. I'd done it. I'd just secured the largest deal our department had landed in 2 years. But before I could even sit down, my boss, Mr. Fenton, appeared in my doorway with the tight smile he reserved for moments when he wanted to disguise cruelty as professionalism. "Sharon," he said. "Conference room. Now." His tone made my stomach drop. I followed him back in, expecting maybe a reprimand for bypassing one of his unnecessary approval steps. Instead, he closed the door, folded his arms, and stared like he'd been waiting for this moment. "I'm letting you go," he said. I blinked. "What?" "We just signed the Fontaine deal. The board—" He cut me off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "That's irrelevant, Sharon." He paused, correcting himself. You, you're simply not up to the standards of this company anymore." The mistake burned. He'd mixed up my name with my coworker. He couldn't even fire me properly. "I just brought in a multi-million-dollar contract," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "How can I possibly be below standards?" He shrugged as if he'd been waiting to deliver this line. "You're unpredictable, emotional, difficult to manage, a liability. Numbers aren't everything, Sharon." A liability. That was the word that stuck. I realized then that it didn't matter what I accomplished. In his eyes, I had always been the intern who spoke up too much at meetings, the analyst who challenged inefficient strategies, the woman who pushed for innovation instead of blindly following outdated procedures. He didn't want someone competent. He wanted someone obedient. And I'd never been that. So I stood there while he slid a termination packet across the table as casually as if he were handing me a lunch menu. "You'll be escorted out," he said. "HR is waiting." Escorted. Like I was a threat. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply nodded, gathered my things, and walked past the coworkers who avoided eye contact because they were grateful it wasn't them. Outside, the winter wind hit me hard. I remember standing on the sidewalk, holding the plant from my desk and the award I'd won only 3 months earlier, thinking, he'll never see my worth. And in that moment, something in me hardened. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. If that company saw me as a failure, then I would build a life where they couldn't define my value again. I spent the next few months quietly rebuilding. I did consulting work for mid-size firms, using the same negotiation skills Fenton always claimed were too aggressive. Except, outside his office, those skills were an asset. Within 6 months, I had a stable client base. Within 9, I had founded my own boutique advisory agency, working with educational nonprofits and sustainable tech companies, the kind of organizations I had always wished my old firm supported. I didn't hear from anyone at my old company. Not Fenton, not HR, not the team I'd carried for years. It was like I'd never existed. Until exactly 1 year later. I was in Chicago preparing for a keynote speech at an annual conference on corporate innovation. I had been selected to receive a national award recognizing contributions to sustainable business strategy, an award funded every year by a private donor who remained anonymous. I didn't think much about who funded it. Awards have donors, that's normal. But the night I walked into that ballroom wearing a navy dress I'd bought with my first consultant paycheck, I heard the announcement, "This year's $2 million research and development grant has been funded by a special contributor, Fenton Industries, my old employer, my old boss's company. The same man who fired me for being a failure." At first, I thought it was a coincidence. No way he knew I would be the honoree. No way he even remembered my name. But then, while the audience applauded, something unexpected happened. Mr. Fenton himself stood up from a VIP table, looked directly at me, and walked out of the ballroom. No expression, no congratulations, just disgust. As if funding the award, without knowing I'd receive it, was the final insult of his career. And that was the moment I knew. This story wasn't over. Not even close. The moment Mr. Fenton walked out of the ballroom, something in me snapped into focus. I'd expected shock, maybe discomfort. But not that. Not a grown man, a CEO, fleeing an award ceremony the moment he realized the $2 million grant his company funded was going to me. I stood there on the stage, smiling for the cameras, pretending nothing was wrong. The applause sounded distant, like someone had lowered the volume on the room. Inside, my thoughts raced. Why would he react like that? What did he know? What was he hiding? I forced myself through the brief speech I'd prepared, thanking the committee and outlining how I intended to use the grant for educational initiatives. My voice stayed steady, but my mind kept drifting to the door he had disappeared through. When the ceremony ended, I slipped into the hallway. The noise of the ballroom faded behind me, replaced by the quieter hum of hotel staff and distant elevators. I scanned the area, half expecting to see him pacing or arguing with someone. Nothing. He was gone. I didn't chase him. Not this time. I went back inside, accepted congratulations, shook hands, posed for photos. But I was no longer present. I kept replaying the moment he'd walked out, the way he hadn't even tried to conceal the disgust on his face. It wasn't just shock. It was personal. Later that night, after the event, I returned to my hotel room and set the award statue on the desk. The plaque gleamed under the warm lamplight. Just a year ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be standing in a Chicago ballroom receiving national recognition. Certainly not funded by the very company that had tossed me aside. Fenton Industries. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. If he wasn't willing to talk to me, then fine. I would find out for myself what he'd been dealing with this past year. The first red flag appeared within seconds. Company performance, down 14%. Major client loss, Fontaine Group. My stomach dropped. The Fontaine Group, the same organization I had secured the $3.7 million deal with. After I was fired, the account must have been reassigned to someone else. And clearly, that someone hadn't been able to maintain the relationship. Losing a contract that size wasn't a minor setback. It was a blow that would have forced the board to ask uncomfortable questions. Questions that might lead back to the decision to fire me. I stared at the report, absorbing the implications. Had the Fontaine Group pulled out because I wasn't managing the account anymore? Or had internal mismanagement driven them away? Either way, the fallout clearly hadn't been pretty. I clicked through more articles. A pattern emerged: slipping revenue, a sudden shift in executive leadership roles, and increasing scrutiny from investors demanding accountability. The final headline made me sit up straighter. Fenton Industries faces internal audit after anonymous compliance concerns. A compliance audit was no joke. It suggested either financial inconsistencies or ethical issues. Either could destroy a company's reputation overnight. My pulse quickened. The timeline matched perfectly, just a few months after I left. But the audit wasn't what shocked me most. It was the funding trail for the award I'd received. Fenton Industries had pledged the donation nearly 8 months ago, long before nominations were announced. According to public filings, the grant had been authorized automatically through an annual philanthropic budget. It was standard for companies trying to improve their social responsibility image. So yes, the company had funded the award, but Mr. Fenton had clearly never expected the honoree to be me. That explained his reaction, but not the intensity of it. Something deeper was at play. The next morning, I flew back to Boston. During the flight, I replayed a detail from the ceremony that hadn't struck me until now. When my name was first announced, several attendees at the VIP table, executives from various industries, looked startled, not impressed. Startled. As if they knew something about Fenton Industries. As if they knew something about me. I spent the weekend reviewing everything I could find. Corporate filings, internal memos made public through legal proceedings, even project timelines. What I discovered wasn't a smoking gun. It was something worse. After I left, my replacement had signed off on a strategy model using my work, my research, my proprietary framework, the same framework I had developed independently after leaving the company. My intellectual property had been folded into a pitch deck used to secure a partnership. It wasn't illegal. They'd changed enough to make it untraceable in court. But they'd underestimated one thing. I had the originals, and I had the timestamps. I closed the folder on my desk and leaned back, a slow realization taking shape. He wasn't angry that I succeeded. He was angry because my success threatened to expose something he'd been hiding. Something buried deep inside Fenton Industries. And for the first time since the night I was fired, I understood. I was no longer the liability. I was the danger. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was circling something important. Something buried deeper than a lost client or misused research. The documents I'd uncovered showed sloppy strategy decisions, inconsistent reporting, and a sudden decline in project oversight. But those were symptoms. Something else had infected Fenton Industries long before I walked away. I just hadn't realized how deep the rot went. The turning point came the following Tuesday, when I received an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. "We need to talk. It's about Fenton." At first, I assumed it was spam, but the sender's name made my stomach flip. Lena Morales, my replacement. We had never met. She'd been hired a week after I was fired, but I remembered hearing her name whispered around industry circles months later. Sharp, ambitious, well-connected. The kind of professional Fenton loved. Polished on paper and unlikely to challenge him. I hesitated, then opened the message. "Sharon, I know you don't know me, but I've been following your work and your recent award. Congratulations, truly. I'm reaching out because something is wrong here. Really wrong. And I think you already know some of it. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. Somewhere private." Lena. My first reaction was suspicion. My second was curiosity. If Fenton wasn't talking, perhaps the woman who replaced me finally understood the trap she had walked into. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our cities. Neutral territory. I arrived 10 minutes early, nerves buzzing with unfiltered anticipation. When Lena walked in, I instantly recognized her from LinkedIn. Poised, smartly dressed, confident. Except today, her confidence looked cracked. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting across from me. "I didn't know who else to contact." "What's going on?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "I made a mistake coming to Fenton Industries. A big one." I leaned forward. Define mistake. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "I was brought in to manage accounts you previously handled. At first, everything seemed fine. But I started noticing inconsistencies. Financial projections that didn't match client data, internal memos contradicting official reports, compliance flags being dismissed without review. That aligned with what I'd already seen, but she wasn't telling me anything new. Yet. "And the Fontaine Group?" I pressed. "Why did they pull out?" "That's the thing," she whispered. "They didn't pull out. We did." I froze. "What?" "I wasn't told at the time, but I found the file last month. Fenton terminated the contract intentionally." I stared at her, unable to process what she'd just said. Terminated it? A $3.7 million deal? No company cuts off its own revenue unless the risk outweighs the reward. "What risk?" I asked sharply. Lena swallowed. "The strategies used in the Fontaine pitch, your strategies, were too effective, too innovative. The projections showed that if those systems were implemented across their operations, Fontaine would eventually outpace Fenton Industries in market influence." It hit me all at once. Fenton hadn't wanted brilliance. He'd wanted control. He hadn't fired me because I was incompetent. He'd fired me because he saw the potential threat of someone who could outperform him. But Lena wasn't finished. "That's not the worst part," she said. "Your framework? The original version you created before you left? I've seen pieces of it copied into internal documents, not just pitch decks, compliance reports, sustainability audits, even investor packets. They've been using it everywhere. My pulse kicked up. That's impossible. They didn't have access to my updated research. She nodded. Exactly. Which means someone inside has been patching together older versions of your work and presenting it as internal development. It's being treated as proprietary. The anger that surged through me was nothing like the hurt I'd felt the day I was fired. This was cleaner, sharper. A violation, not an insult. I forced myself to breathe. Why are you telling me all this now? She looked away, ashamed. Because last week, compliance finally came knocking. They requested files I'd never even seen. Internal auditing is underway, and from what I've heard, they're looking for someone to blame. Someone expendable. Someone like me. 1 year ago. Or like her. Right now. You think they'll pin it on you? I said quietly. Yes, she whispered. But the truth is, this started long before I came. And I think you're the only person who understands the full picture. I didn't respond right away. I stared at her. This woman who had unknowingly stepped into the chaos I'd left behind. And for the first time, I saw exactly how my revenge would begin. Not with anger, but with precision. Lena, I said finally, I'm going to help you. But you need to do exactly what I tell you. Her eyes widened. You have a plan? I nodded, feeling the strategy lock into place. Oh yes, I said. And it starts with Fenton learning that he fired the wrong woman. Over the next week, Lena and I spoke privately almost every evening. She sent me documents, internal emails, audit requests, nothing illegal to share, only items she already had access to as part of her role. I analyzed everything carefully, not to expose the company yet, but to understand exactly what we were dealing with. The deeper we went, the clearer it became. Fenton hadn't just mismanaged his department. He had built an entire system around avoidance, dodging accountability, redirecting credit, manipulating audits, and silencing anyone who challenged him. I had never realized how much of his authority came from intimidation rather than competence. But now, for the first time, he was cornered, and he knew it. The internal audit had already uncovered irregularities, though nothing catastrophic yet. The company board was demanding extensive documentation for the last 12 months. That gave us a window, small but enough to place pressure exactly where it belonged. My goal wasn't to destroy Fenton Industries. It was to expose the truth, that the person he'd fired for being below standards had been carrying the department for years, and that without my work, his entire operation had begun to unravel. The first step was simple. Lena, I said during our call, I need you to request clarification on every strategy document tied to the Fontaine account. She hesitated. Won't that make me look like I don't understand my own files? No, I replied. It will make you look thorough, and it forces the audit team to examine the timeline. Once they see the gaps, the inconsistencies in authorship, and where the strategy originally came from, they'll realize the foundation wasn't built by you, or by Fenton. She nodded slowly. And when they ask who created the original version, they'll find my name, I said, because it's on every time-stamped file I drafted before I left. It wasn't revenge. It was accuracy. And accuracy was something Fenton had avoided for years. 2 days later, Lena followed through. She sent a detailed inquiry to the auditing team, copying 3 executives and the head of compliance. Her email was professional, neutral, and carefully worded. Within hours, she received a reply from compliance asking for all earlier versions of the strategy, versions she didn't have. That was exactly what we needed, because the only earlier versions existed on the shared drive from before I was fired. And those files contained my name. The following morning, Lena messaged me. They pulled the earliest drafts. Your signature is all over them. Fenton is panicking. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a calm male voice said, "Dr. Palmer, this is Elijah Brooks, Senior Counsel for Fenton Industries. Do you have a moment to speak?" My pulse didn't rise. I had expected this. "Yes, I do," I said. He cleared his throat. "We are reviewing documents related to legacy strategy frameworks. Your name appears frequently in material currently under audit. We would like to confirm the nature of your involvement and whether you retain any ownership claims regarding the methodology." His tone was polite, but I could hear the caution underneath. "I developed that framework independently," I said. "The company used earlier variations while I was employed, but I did not transfer rights to any updated versions created after my departure." There was a pause, long enough to confirm he already knew this. "Thank you," he said finally. "Your cooperation is appreciated." He hung up quickly. Too quickly. Lena called 5 minutes later. "He ran straight to Fenton's office," she said breathlessly. "I didn't hear everything, but the board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow. They're not happy." Of course they weren't. The company's flagship sustainability strategy, one they had promoted to investors, to partners, even to media outlets, was built on my work. And the person Fenton had blamed for the department's failings was suddenly the person whose absence had crippled them. Still, I didn't want the company to collapse. People's jobs were at stake. Lena's future was at stake. My revenge wasn't scorched earth. It was precision-guided. So we planned the next step. "Tomorrow," I told her, "you're going to attend the board meeting. And you're going to tell the truth. Calmly, professionally, just facts. No accusations." She swallowed. "And if Fenton tries to blame me, then the board will compare the quality of your work to the mess he created," I said. "And they'll see exactly what's been happening." For the first time, she exhaled with real relief. "I can do that," she said. That night, as I reviewed the documents one last time, something unexpected happened. I realized I felt nothing about the man who'd once humiliated me. No anger, no grief, no desire for validation. He had built the collapse of his own credibility brick by brick. I was simply illuminating the cracks. The next morning, Lena sent one final message before entering the boardroom. "Whatever happens in there, thank you for not walking away." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about truth. Go show them what he tried to hide." And with that, the trap closed. Lena entered the boardroom at 9:02 a.m. By 9:17, my phone began vibrating nonstop. I didn't pick up at first. I let the notifications pile in. One message from her, then another, then a third. I forced myself to breathe before opening them. He's losing control. They're asking questions he can't answer. They know the framework wasn't his idea. I sat back, letting those words sink in. This wasn't about humiliating him. It was about clarity finally reaching the place where it had been missing the longest. At 10:03, my phone rang. This time it was a number I recognized. The chairman of Fenton Industries, a man I'd interacted with only twice during my years at the company. "Dr. Palmer," he said as soon as I answered. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." He paused long enough for me to hear the tension in his breath. "We're in the middle of reviewing strategic discrepancies related to the sustainability division," he said carefully. "Your name appears extensively. We would appreciate your insight." "My insight," I repeated. "Or my silence." He let out a quiet exhale. Not frustration, but resignation. "Your honesty." For the first time in days, I felt something loosen in my chest. They didn't want a scapegoat. They wanted the truth. And they knew exactly who had it. "I'll speak with you," I said, "but on record, and only with compliance present." "Of course," he replied. "In fact, we would prefer it." He scheduled a remote session for the early afternoon. Until then, all I could do was wait. At 1:03 p.m., the video conference began. 4 faces appeared, The chairman, the legal counsel, the head of compliance, and one board member I vaguely remembered shaking hands with 3 years earlier. What surprised me wasn't their formality. It was their expressions. Not anger, concern. Dr. Palmer, the chairman began, we understand you were instrumental in developing the original sustainability framework used during the Fontaine negotiations. I was, I said, and I have the documentation to verify that. We've seen it. Compliance added. It aligns with the earliest drafts recovered from internal servers. Legal counsel cleared his throat. We're trying to determine how much of this work was produced under your employment contract and how much was created independently after your departure. I can provide a clear distinction, I said, lifting a folder. But the core issue isn't ownership. The issue is misrepresentation. 4 heads lifted slightly. The company, I continued, presented my methodology as a fully internal development. That was inaccurate. And when decisions were made after my departure, those decisions were based on partial, outdated versions of the model. That's why the Fontaine account deteriorated. Not because of negligence from current staff, but because the framework was never meant to be used without the updated components. Silence filled the screen. Finally, the chairman spoke. This aligns with what Ms. Morales has told us. Lena, telling the truth even when it placed her under scrutiny. It was more courage than I'd ever seen inside that building. The legal counsel looked uneasy. Dr. Palmer, we need to ask directly. Do you intend to pursue action against the company for the use of your intellectual property? A year ago, I might have. Not for revenge, but for dignity. But now? I didn't need anything from them. They had already handed me the one thing I never got while working there. Acknowledgement. No, I said. I want nothing from Fenton Industries. I simply want the record corrected, and I expect Ms. Morales to be cleared of responsibility. Compliance nodded immediately. She will be. And, I added, I want assurance that the board understands the truth about why the sustainability division failed after my departure. The chairman leaned forward. We do, he said, very clearly. He dismissed the meeting shortly after, thanking me for my professionalism. But the final blow didn't come from the board, or compliance, or legal counsel. It came an hour later in the form of an email. Subject: Leadership Transition Announcement. The message was brief. Effective immediately, Andrew Fenton has resigned from his position as CEO of Fenton Industries. An interim leadership team has been appointed as the board continues its audit and restructuring process. No theatrics. No excuses. Just the quiet end of a man who had built his authority on intimidation and watched it evaporate the moment facts replaced fear. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching someone fall, but there was closure. Later that evening, Lena called me. They removed him from the building, she whispered. Security escorted him out the same way he once escorted you. Her voice was soft, not triumphant, not malicious, just relieved. What will you do now? I asked. Stay, she said, and rebuild the department the right way. I smiled. Good. They'll need someone competent. And you? She asked. I already built what I needed, I said, and I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. When I hung up, the quiet in my home felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just free. The man who once called me a failure had funded the award that elevated my career, and the system he used to belittle me had finally crumbled under the weight of the truth. I didn't ruin him. He did that himself. All I did was stop cleaning up his mess,